There are 19 million war veterans living in the United States today, but every day we lose 1,500 of them. Motivated by a desire to honor our nation's war veterans for their service and to collect their stories and experiences while they are still among us, the United States Congress has created the Veterans History Project. This project covers World War I, World War II, and the Korean, Vietnam, and Persian Gulf Wars. It includes all participants in those wars, men and women, civilian and military. It documents all ranks from all branches of service, the Air Force, Army, Marine Corps, and Navy, as well as the U.S. Coast Guard and Merchant Marine.
Hello, and welcome to the Veteran History Project. I'm your host, Mike Vanderpool. My guest today is Warren Bud Cornock, born on December 3rd, 1925, and currently living in Rochester Hills, Michigan. Today is Monday, November 24th, 2003, and we are Oakland University's television studio. Welcome, Bud, to the program today. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to be with us here.
Thank you.
Glad you can make it and find it with no problem. We'll get started by finding out which branch of the service were you enlisted in?
The Navy Reserve.
And what was your job there?
Well, I went in as a seaman, and then after boot camp, I went to 4 weeks of Boilermaker school.
Okay.
I had worked as a Boilermaker helper before I went into service, so that was part of it. And then I was a Boilermaker, which does repair work aboard ship and that, and valves and the boiler if ever need be, but you always have leaky valves and whatever that you have to repair, and that was my job.
Okay. Which conflicts were you involved in? In which war?
Oh, World War II.
Okay.
And I did convoy duty in the North Atlantic in '44.
When did you enlist?
In June of '43.
And how old were you at the time?
17.
Okay, what made you want to enlist?
Well, I was mad at the Japs, actually. I mean,
is it Pearl Harbor that basically?
Yeah, they attacked our country.
Okay. Do you remember where you were at when Pearl Harbor was attacked?
I was at home. It was Sunday. I was at home, and the following day in school, we all went to the auditorium and heard the declaration of war by President Roosevelt.
Mm-hmm. Did your family have any military history?
My father was in the Navy in World War I. So I picked up a lot of his records through trying to build a family tree and whatever. And he was aboard ship, but most of his action was right in the American theater of war, down to Cuba and South America. And he didn't go across the pond.
Do you remember what some of your thoughts and feelings were when we were bombed?
Well, I felt sorry for the guys that were there, of course, but and thank God I wasn't there. But it made you mad. I mean, they were in Washington lying to us when the bombs dropped. And I don't know, if you were in a bar and somebody treated you that way, it's a much smaller thing, but it'd make you mad and you'd want to fight. And that's what it was all about, huh? I had friends, and we went earlier. When I was 16, they opened up enlistment for a short time, and we went down and tried to enlist, and I guess they filled their quota or something, and so we waited, and then some of them, well, I had another buddy in one in the Navy and a couple in the Marine Corps, a few in the Army, and there was about a dozen of us in the neighborhood that were kids together, and when the war was over, we were buddies in our beer drinking days and whatever.
So then you did have friends and family that were involved in the conflict as well?
Yeah.
In the war?
Run into one another once in a while. We had to leave or something. We got home.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you have any reservations about leaving your family behind when you enlisted?
Not at all. I've been a wanderer all my life, and my father was before me. So, to give you an example, my father was raised in Kentucky, born and raised in Kentucky, and I've got a sister a year and a half older than me that was born in Kentucky. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and raised in Kentucky. But he wandered a little too, which I have. But of course, I got to see a lot of the world while I was in the Navy also.
Mm-hmm. Were you at all afraid about anything at the time? I mean, enlisting in the war seems like...
I've seen movies about the war, and just recently a guy said to John Wayne that he was scared. He said, so am I. And I don't think we had any. Well, there's going to be the odd few, but the majority of the guys weren't afraid. We were teenagers. You're not afraid of anything, you know. Yeah. I just, no, I remember one time after we got torpedoed, we had a alert, the first one after we had been torpedoed, and it took me, I don't remember the bell, you know, it rings, general quarters, blang, 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 and I don't think it rang more than 5 times, and I was from the aft end of the ship to my general quarter station in the forward fire room. About 5 rings of the bell, which is maybe 10 seconds, you know. Mm-hmm. But that was the only time that I ever felt scared at all. I don't know, and I don't truly think I was scared then. It was just that I wanted to be ready.
Did you know before you left what did you expect in the military? Was there anything? Did you have any idea what you were getting yourself into?
No, I joined the Navy because I figured I'd have a dry bed and a warm meal. I didn't want to be in the trenches. The doughboys were the ones that really had a bad time, you know. But no, I joined the Navy for that reason. And maybe a little influence. My father was in the Navy before me, so it might have influenced me a little.
Where did you attend boot camp at?
Great Lakes. Yeah, it's about halfway between Milwaukee and Chicago and Lake Michigan.
Mm-hmm. And what was that like?
Well, you're exercising all the time. It seems like you had your meals and you slept, and the rest of the time you're on the drill field exercising. I mean, they had you in top shape. It didn't take that long. It was only like 6 weeks. But it really wasn't. We had a few buddies in the barracks. Of course, everybody, it's a community shower, so you know who's got a scar on what part of their body, you know. But that was, I had never been introduced to something like that before, you know.
So it's totally different then.
You lost all privacy in your life, you know.
Okay, were there any instructors in boot camp that you remember?
I got in a fight one time, and in another barracks, I was on a work detail, and the kid on guard duty, I've had a bed spring under each arm. And the rule is if you're on a work detail, you don't have to take your hat off. But otherwise, when you enter the barracks, you take your hat off. And I went walking up the stairs and got to the landing, and, well, he told me a couple times to take my hat off, so I set the spring down and took it off, and he come walking up the stairs and punched me in the mouth. And I don't remember leaving the landing, but when I stopped, he was on the floor, and I'm standing over him down the flight of stairs. And there was a new company coming in, and the chief petty officer that was in charge of that company come out, and this guy that was on guard he said, I told him to take his hat off, he wouldn't do it, and then he hit me. I mean, I was, and I said, that's not the truth. He hit me, and I was on a work detail to start with, and blah, 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 and he slapped me, and I kicked him in the shins and took off running. And then I went and talked to my chief petty officer in charge of my company, and he told me, he says, you had witnesses, but they're all raw recruits, and they're just afraid as you are, and so I don't think you'd get anybody to back you. He said, I think the best thing for you to do is forget about it, and if you see him come and duck in around the corner or something, and just don't ever make contact with him, with the chief, so he doesn't know who you are or where you are.
Do you remember your chief petty officer's name?
No, I don't, but I got a picture of him. I'm with him. I mean, but no, I don't. I have a bad memory anyway when it comes to names.
Were there any other experiences in boot camp that stick with you?
No, not really.
It seems like it was pretty quick, 6 weeks,
yeah,
and you're out, right? So after boot camp, where did you go?
The Boilermaker School.
And where was that at?
That Great Lakes also.
Still Great Lakes, okay.
Yeah, 4 months of that. We had some good times and bad times. I remember getting drunk one time on wine, and I don't drink wine anymore. I woke up the next morning, and I must have had 10 different types of pop out of the pop machines, and water and whatever to try to quench my thirst, and couldn't. And then we finally got out. We went on Liberty. We went across the street, and I don't know how I got served it, but I got a shell of beer. Drank that, and that was the end of my thirst and the end of my drinking. I didn't drink anymore for a while.
What was the typical day like in Boilermaker School?
Well, I'd say it's close to what you're doing in college. Well, if you're in it'd be more like a technical apprentice type thing, You got your classwork and whatever, and didn't have much homework. You didn't have the lessons like you do in school or college, but had a lot of classwork, and they taught welding, and we had to learn to weld, and both acetylene and arc welding, because we needed it to make repairs,
Mm-hmm.
But there wasn't any incident amount to. Well, we had a guy that was in the group with us, and I don't know. The Navy decides. Well, I think the Army and the Marines do too. They decide where you should be. This guy was a baker with, like, Wonder Bread Company, baked for large amounts all the time, and they needed somebody like that. But they insisted that his IQ test or whatever it was put him in Boilermaker School. And the guy would, even with the mask on, he'd strike an arc with the electric welder, and it'd burn his eyes. He spent 3 or 4 days in the hospital, and come back, and boom, it happened again. And they insisted, though, that he was going to be a Boilermaker, when they could have used him in the bakery. But that's the Navy way, There's the right way, the wrong way, and the Navy way.
So during this schooling, did you have any idea where you were going to go, what the next step was for you?
No, not at all. You got out of there, and Next thing you know, you got to get a train and you're on your way, and you didn't know until you got there where you were going. They claimed that was for security reasons, but I don't know if it was easier to just put you all in a herd and send you somewhere.
So, do you remember what your thoughts were on the train ride to who knows where?
No, I probably slept most of the way.
Doesn't sound like a bad idea. Now, where did you end up after that train ride?
Brooklyn Navy Yard. That's where I went aboard ship. And they claimed our whole home port was Boston, but we pulled most of our duty out of Brooklyn Navy Yard. We'd leave, and it was an average of every 30 days. You'd have about 5 days in the States, and you'd have 5 days in Europe, and 10 days each way. So every 30 days you left Brooklyn. Well, we did pull. We pulled one out of Boston, and we pulled a convoy out of Charleston, South Carolina. But the rest of them were out of Brooklyn Navy Yard. And I was born in Brooklyn. I had a lot of relatives there, so.
That's what I was just going to say. Kind of interesting, that circle you made there.
Well,
being born there.
My mother was one of 10. My mother came over from Holland when she was 6 years old, and then out of 10 kids, there was a lot of offsprings from that, and I all through, well, New Jersey, more than New York, up northern New Jersey is like a suburb in New York City, and I had cousins all over up there. I don't know, they might lose half their population they got rid of. Well, my mother's maiden name was Vellicamp, and there was a lot of them, and I'd visit them when I got liberty,
So when you first got to Brooklyn Navy Yard, what did you do there?
Well, made yourself familiar with what you were going to be doing they trained us what our watch would be and how to run the boilers. And
wasn't that much different from Boilermaker School then, or not?
Yeah, the Boilermaker School is teaching them more for the repair work, like the welding and stuff like that, where we really didn't have a boiler as such to work on or try to learn what that was all about, But when you got aboard ship, you found out what the boiler was all about.
Well, Bud, we're going to have to take a quick break. We will be right back and learn more about Bud when he actually boarded ship and headed out into the Atlantic.
Mr. and Mrs. Jones, Sally's having some behavioral problems.
I guess that reward system isn't working.
Well, the timeouts weren't either.
Parents do find that timeouts aren't...
See?
Well, you're just too lenient.
Well, you're too strict.
No, you are.
No, you are.
No, you are.
No, you are.
When adults don't have the answers, they can feel as frustrated as kids. ConnectForKids.org has thousands of resources for helping kids in your community. ConnectForKids.org, guidance for grown-ups.
These kids are in trouble. They have a problem learning, and their parents are waiting too long before getting them help. Don't wait. The sooner you get help, the better the chance your kid has.
You're watching OUTV, Oakland University's Channel 74. Think success, think Oakland University.
Hello and welcome back to the Veteran History Project. I'm your host, Mike Vanderpool, and my guest today is Mr. Bud Cornock. We're talking about your time at Brooklyn Navy Yard before you set sail. When was the first time you actually stepped onto a ship?
Oh, do you mean the date?
Well, no, just do you remember?
Well, I remember going aboard, and I think we all would be curious as to whether you're going to be seasick or not. You know, you hear everybody gets seasick, and I had a guy tell me, he says, if you feel queasy, when the ship goes out, if you feel queasy, he says, stuff everything in your face you can get your hands on. Just eat everything you can, and you'll be all right. Well, I took him at his word, and I did, and I've never been seasick in my life. We had a young fella come aboard, and he swore he was going to be seasick. And when they threw the line off the dock to the ship, we hadn't moved yet, and he was seasick. And he was seasick all the way to England. 10 days. I mean, you know, and I don't think there's anything worse than being seasick. They get the dry heaves, and they're miserable. They really go to sleep, maybe sleep a few hours and wake up and feel good, and when they get to the mess hall and smell the food, they're sick again. And it's that way all the way. But I never experienced that, and we were in some rough water.
What was the first ship that you were on?
The Fog.
What type of ship was that?
Destroyer escort, 306 foot long. We had a 210 men crew.
And what was the function of the ship? What was its mission?
Well, we're strictly escort duty. I mean, they have the flagship in the center of the convoy, and then they'll have troop ships and tankers and supply ships around that, and then you have like where we were. There was a lot of times that you didn't see any of the other ships. You're at sea because you're 15 miles away from the convoy, zigzagging back and forth the anti-submarine warfare. But and we escorted the largest convoy of troops to go across in World War II, go across the Atlantic. When we come back to New York after the convoy, there was an old four-stacker battleship that they pulled out of mothballs. I think the name of it Arkansas or something like that, and it sat right in the middle of the convoy, you know. And they had headlines in the New York Times that the Arkansas just completed the largest convoy of troops to go home. Well, the Arkansas was the most protected ship in the convoy. Sat right in the middle of it, you know.
What was life like for you on the Fog?
Well, I enjoyed it. It wasn't bad. The food wasn't bad. I guess we had some pretty good cooks, probably from the South. But yeah, the food was pretty good, and I did a lot of exercising. I had a speed bag hanging in the machine, the engine space, and I'd go down there and punch that thing for 3-4 hours. Kill a lot of time that way. I mean, there's not much else you can do, especially in the Atlantic. You're not above decks because they skirted the southern tip of Greenland. The reason being that's the roughest water, and the German torpedoes they couldn't guide them. They jumped out of the water and everything, and they were almost useless. About the only time we did get a few alerts on submarines from sonar and that, but we'd see them visually when we were coming to the English Channel. The German sub had 8-inch guns. Ours were 3.5 inches. You know, they could lob shells at us, you know, set out of our range. But that we didn't have contact with many of them in the you know, coming across because it was so rough. Saw a 90-foot wave. I went to see that perfect storm for that reason. But I saw 90-foot waves in the North Atlantic, and the ship was doing 56-degree rolls, and they were afraid the water was going to go down the stack and put the boiler out. You're dead in the water. you're done, you know, in a storm like that. But really wasn't a whole lot to do when you were at sea. The water was so rough that every once in a while you'd slip out on the boat deck behind the flying bridge, and there's a hatch there, and you open it up, and there'd be maybe 2 foot of dry deck. And you stand there with your back to that and get some fresh air, and there couldn't be more than 10 or 12 guys out there at one time because that's all the room you had, you know.
So I guess you're not claustrophobic then, having to spend all that time below.
Well, I volunteered for submarine duty, so that part of it wouldn't bother me, I don't think, you know. I got rejected. I think they had their quota at that time, too, because the story I got was I had one too many teeth in my mouth.
It's the real story?
Yeah, it's the truth, and you know, they could pull one out.
So, what about your job on the boiler, or on the fog as a boiler maker? You do the same thing day in, day out then?
Yeah, it was the same thing. We stood watches 4 hours on and 8 hours off, and I was the fireman. I had 10 boilers. No shoveling coal. You know, it was all oil burners, and if they changed speeds, you had to change we had 3 burners in the boiler, and you'd have to pull the burners out and change them to a bigger or smaller size and whatever. And we had a telescope there. You'd look through this thing, there's mirrors, and it would go up, and it was right next to the stack. And you didn't send any black smoke out of the stack. You had to get the right air mixture with the oil to keep it from burning. Well, just like your automobile, if your carburetor's not adjusted right, you get black smoke out the tailpipe and whatever, and that we had to make those adjustments, and you had to keep an eye on it. But we had our own coffee pot, and we had a little hot plate, and we could fix our own breakfast and whatever down there. It was like we had our own little community. Wasn't bad duty.
Did you make any close friends on the fog?
I see one that I see him every year at a reunion now. Freddie Fosterman. And I remembered him because he was from New Orleans. And he used to tease me all the time. He says, there's no place like New Orleans. He said, when this war is over, you come down and I'll show you the best time you've ever had in your life, you know. Well, it never happened because we got separated. But I see him now. He's at the reunion. I just saw him in Baltimore about a month ago. Yeah. He's a couple years older than me, and but a real super nice guy.
Did you ever see any combat on the fog? Was the ship ever involved in any battles?
We did drop depth charges in that. So chasing subs, and you don't know if you really hit them or not. Like you've seen movies of the subs where they put clothing and stuff like that in the torpedo tube and send it up, and maybe some empty oil cans or something with oil in it, make it look like you made a hit on them. So we got credit for sinking a couple subs, but there was no definite proof. You don't see them; they're underwater. They usually go down instead of up. So, but yeah, we had the convoy we took out Charleston, South Carolina was a 3-knot convoy, and the water down there was like glass, just flat and smooth, and going 3 knots. We had 36 sub-alerts in one day, but there again, you don't see the sub. You get the alert on sonar and everything, and you're on your battle stations, and if they get close enough and figure they have to have a chance, we had hedgehogs and depth charges, and they'd fire them. But of course, there again, I was in the fire room, forward fire room on General Quarters Station.
So a lot of that stuff was going on, and you had no idea. You're just tending to the boiler.
Mm-hmm. When we were torpedoed, I bounced off the steam lines, But other than that, I didn't see any of it.
When you were torpedoed, where did that occur?
About 500 miles off the coast of France. It blew 99 foot 9 inches of the aft end of the ship off, the screws and whatever.
So that's about a third of the ship, right?
And the ship was 306 feet long, and the hull of a DEs, they built the DEs for World War II. They put them out as quick as they could, and the hull wasn't heavy armor plate like the regular destroyers and the cruisers and that. Our hull was probably ½ inch thick, and when that torpedo hit, it busted the hull, everything but the main deck, and it folded it up and then the motion of the water, 2 days later, it just like taking a wire and bending it. That deck kept going back and forth until it broke off and sunk. And at that time, they thought we were going to sink, but they were able to ballast, pump in seawater and level it off, and they towed us into the Azores.
When you were torpedoed and you were below deck, did you know what happened?
Yeah. My first thought was the salvage law of the sea. Anything you can salvage is yours if the ship goes down. And there was 2 guns up in the small arms locker that I would like to have, so I went up and got both of them and several clips for them and gun belts and whatever, and went back down to the forward fire room and watch. Well, they had called stand by to abandon ship and then delay the last word, and that went on 3 or 4 times, and finally it didn't sink, so I had to turn it all back in.
Now,
but
what were your thoughts when you I guess came up on deck and actually saw the destruction? Did you yourself think that obviously you thought that the ship was going to sink?
Not really. I don't think when I was down in the fire room and they had called stand by to abandon ship, I was looking forward to it sinking because I got these guns. But then afterwards, I watched that deck. I'd go up when I didn't have hardly any watch to stand because we weren't under power. And I'd go up and you could watch that deck and figured sooner or later it's going to break, And but I didn't think about at that point. I didn't think about it sinking.
Were there any casualties, injuries because of that?
We have 15 guys who were killed, yeah, and I don't know how many injured. I do have one friend that comes on to the reunions. He was on one of the aft gun decks and it threw him into the water, and he's got his legs and knees are still. He's going in every so often for surgery and whatever. They bother him a lot. I think a lot of it from the wounds and that the arthritis starts getting to it, but not a real nice guy. Funny, he went into service from Texas and was discharged back to Texas, and he ended up in Louisville, Kentucky. He lives there now, and I went in and out in Louisville, and I'm up here in Michigan. But Bill Horton, a super nice guy, but I didn't know him aboard ship. He was in the deck force, and so I hadn't met him before. And there was a few that I met, but it all happened so fast, and you know, I only knew any of them. I was only on the ship a year. I went on early in '44, and we got torpedoed 20th of December of '44. So you don't have a chance to make a lot of friends.
What did you do after you were torpedoed then?
Well, they give me, when you get torpedoed, the rule was you could have shore duty for the duration of the war. And they give me two choices. One was Norfolk, Virginia, and during World War II, the citizens in Norfolk had signs on their lawns that said, "Sailors and dogs keep off the grass." That's what they thought of the Navy, so I didn't want to spend much time there. And the other place was Algiers, and we made one trip to Algiers, to North Africa, and I didn't want to, you don't know how long the war's going to last. I didn't figure I wanted to be in Africa for any length of time, and so I requested sea duty, and I got on an APD, and we went through the Panama and out to the Pacific, and it was rigged to haul frogmen, and so we did a lot of picket duty and out there at the Brock, USS Brock. But and I got about a year in the Pacific.
Well, Bud, we're going to take a short break, and then we will be right back to hear about Bud's time in the Pacific. Thank you.
In after-school programs, your kids will find the hero inside themselves. Let us know you on after-school programs in your area. Call 1-800-USA-LEARN.
Thousands of kids in this country have everything it takes to go to college, except the money. The United Negro College Fund. A mind is a terrible thing to waste.
Well, I was 10 when I first got involved with drugs. I skipped school because, nobody cared. I was on drugs, and my mom didn't really care because she was on drugs. She was never home. I was in 8th grade for like 3 years. I was heading nowhere. I just thought the only way I can make something out of my life is that if I get an education, I don't want to be a loser, some loser getting high all the time. I want to make something out of it.
I'm a student here at OU, and you're watching OU TV.
Hello, and welcome back to the Veteran History Project. I'm your host, Mike Vanderpool. My guest today is Mr. Bud Cornock. Bud, I want to talk a little bit about your time in the Pacific. After you were on the Fog, after the Fog was torpedoed, you mentioned you boarded the USS Brock.
Mm-hmm.
And same job, Boilermaker?
Yeah, the Brock is basically a DE, and then they, on the boat deck, they built, on each side, they just built 2 long rooms there for hauling frogmen. They had 60 bunks on each side, and that was mainly our duty. And but we did a lot of picket duty too, just anti-submarine warfare,
Is that what is picket duty? Is that?
Well, we're out around the perimeter to keep subs from coming in to your supply ships and stuff like that, like in the Philippine Islands, and so we're small ships and could move it pretty fast, and they used its anti-submarine warfare. And I got out there by request because they didn't the places they offered me didn't agree. I didn't want to go to Algiers, and I found out later that after I was in the Pacific for a while that Algiers is a Navy base on the Mississippi River across from New Orleans. They didn't say Algiers, Louisiana, or whatever, and I assumed it was North Africa, and I still kick myself for that one, but something that can't be helped.
So then, how long was the trip from the Atlantic across to the Asian seas?
Well, we stopped in Hawaii. We were in Hawaii for like 2-3 weeks.
So you sailed out of California then?
Yeah, well,
Okay.
we sailed out of Boston, Massachusetts on the APD and went through the Panama Canal and then up to San Pedro, and from there we headed to Hawaii, and we trained with the frogmen in Hawaii for about 3 weeks before we headed on out. So all total, we'd probably, I'd say 5-6 weeks to get to the Philippine Islands, whatever, where the action was.
Do you have any stories, anything you remember about that trip? Well,
that's the one time that I was scared. We hit this. I don't know. I've never been able to find it on the chart or on the map, but it's called Karamaretta, and it was like it's almost like a huge volcano that sunk in the ocean, but it left this rim of islands around, and you got one entry into it, and makes a nice harbor for weather and for enemy. And we stopped there and spent a couple days and got supplies and whatever. But we had no sooner got there, and we had a air raid, and that's when that was the only time I can remember that I was ever scared. I got to my general quarters stations real quick, but yeah, other than that, we didn't have an incident until, of course, once you get down to the Philippines and any of the islands, then you've got there was some action. You might not hit that much, but you had kamikazes coming over, and they might not be directly over you, but your radar picked them up, and as soon as the radar picked one up, you'd be on general quarters station.
So the kamikaze pilots would try to fly into your ship?
It's like these bombers. They got the suicide people, the ones that took the airplane into the Twin Towers. They know they had, the way I understand it, they had a ceremony in Japan the day before they left. They were treated like king and big celebration and everything. When they got in that plane, they knew they'd never come back, because we could not fire on them at night until they knew that they were diving on our ship, because they'd follow the tracer right to the barrel of the gun. And so they'd be in the area, but they wouldn't allow the gunners to fire a gun until they knew the plane was diving directly on us, because they would follow that tracer. It would, like giving them a map how to get there. None of them flew the second mission.
What were your thoughts then, as with all these kamikazes and flying around? And I mean, you're still doing your day-to-day routine.
Yeah, I don't know. You did. It was like that was part of your days. I don't know. We'd probably been disappointed if we didn't get an alert, but it was like part of your day's activities. We after we were in the Philippines for a while, and we got some R&R and went to Hollandia, New Guinea, to a little place for 2 weeks. Half the ship went over for a week, and then they come back, rest and relaxation, you know. And that was the highest tide that I had seen in my life. I know there's a lot more now, but at that time I'd never been to the ocean until I got in the Navy. And they had 20-foot tide there, and we were there for rest and relaxation, and so we're swimming off the ship and whatever, and there was 3 guys that got in what they call a punt, about as big as this carpet, made out of plywood, and they put it over the side, and guys clean and paint the hull out of that. And they were playing around with that, and there's 3 of them in it. And when the tide come in, the ship's anchored. That punt was going in towards the shore. I dove off the ship, and I'm going to help them. You know, I could swim and push it maybe, you know, but because they were getting further away, and I got almost to it, and the motor launch come out, threw them a line and towed them in, and then I had to swim back against the tide. I didn't know if I was going to make it or not. I did, but young and strong enough, I guess, I wouldn't be able to do it today. Do
you have any other stories you'd like to share about when you were on the Brock?
Well, when we went to Hollandia, we crossed the equator, and of course that's a big celebration for the Navy. I've heard that they discontinued them; they don't do it anymore. But you're a pollywog until you cross the equator, and they initiate you, and then you become a shellback, and it's quite a ceremony. I've got a plaque at home. Well, I had it, and my wife got a hold of it and had it framed and everything, and she thinks it's the greatest thing there is. But it's a certificate for going through all of this. They start you out like we had the passageway where the frogmen slept. We didn't have any aboard at that time, and they greased the floor, and they put a rope diagonally all the way down. And these guys planned ahead of time, and they took canvas and made a sack out of it, and stuffed paper in it, and put them in the bilges and let it get soaked with salt water. And they were like baseball bats. And you had to crawl on your hands and knees under these ropes, and there was a guy in each one of these V's where the rope, and everyone had to hit you. If one of them missed you, you had to go back and start all over. So you're trying not to slip, you know, trying to go as slow as you can, let everybody get a whack. And they had the biggest guys in the front, and they'd hit you, and you'd slide through 3 or 4. Finally, after a couple times, they'd let you get through it. And they had one thing where they laid you on your back and put chicken guts in your mouth. Of course, you're not going to swallow them. They had a butcher knife, and the blade was copper, and they had it hooked up to electricity, and they run that across your belly, and you gulp, and then they had the chicken guts were tied to a string, and they'd pull them back out. There was half a dozen different had to crawl. They made all kinds of stuff, and it was all aboard ship. We were at sea. We were in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah, I guess you have to find something to pass the time with.
They put the captain in the hospital. He was a pollywog. They put him through the initiation. The oldest shellback is King Neptune for the day, and so the captain had to go through the initiation just like the rest of us. And I guess he was a little tender, and they bruised him up, beating on him, and put him in the hospital.
Do you remember what you were thinking during that initiation?
No,
just get me through it.
Get me through it. It was fun. I mean, we're all kids, and it was fun. Something that you wouldn't take all the money in the world for. It was an experience that you'll always remember, and it was fun. We had a good time.
Then from there, in the Philippines, and with the kamikazes, all that stuff going on, how long were you actually involved?
Oh, probably 6 months. And then, of course, the war. They dropped the bomb. What was it, August of '45?
Where were you at when we dropped the bomb?
We were off the coast of Japan. They were getting ready to invade Japan at the time they dropped the bomb. They estimated there'd be 2 million Allied servicemen killed in it. So most of us were praying for the bomb, because the Japs lived in, well, and still do as far as I know. They live in caves. I've been told that they've got supermarkets now, 10 stores underground, way down like Tokyo and that. Well, there's a lot of people on that little island. But we got into, after the war was over, we went into Yokohama and on Liberty and looking for souvenirs and whatever. Got out and went walking through one of these caves, and it was wide enough you could put about 10 city buses side by side and go through it. And then they had their little cubby holes in the walls where they lived and whatever. And the war wasn't over for them yet. Myself and my buddy, and we're walking in, and we look behind, and there's 2, 3 Japs. And next time we look back, there's 15 or 20. And they were going to get us, so we got out of there and got back near the dock where we had a little safety.
What were your feelings when the war ended?
I didn't mind being in service while it was going on, but as soon as it ended, I was like a chain line. I wanted to get out now. It was all over, no need for me to be there. So.
How much longer did you end up being involved?
Well, I was discharged in March of '46.
So about 6 months, 5, 6 months after?
Yeah. We left. I was in Honolulu New Year's Eve of '45, '46. And so that's 5 months after the about 4 months in August, about 4 months after the bomb drop. But we were in Tokyo Bay at anchor for a couple months. And after the bomb drop, I went on a sightseeing tour of Hiroshima. I was in there within 90 days after the bomb drop.
What was that like?
Barren. Just the only thing that was standing was stone structures, like grave markers. The graveyard had the stone structures that held the fence, and every so often there'd be a stone structure there, and the iron in between. Well, the iron was melted, but the stone was still there. Streetcars. I know when I was a kid, we used to take a Coke bottle. Of course, they don't even have Coke bottles hardly anymore. take a little Coke bottle and throw it in a bonfire and get all distorted. Well, the solid steel streetcar wheels were that way in Hiroshima. Trees that were 3-4 foot in diameter at their base, 30 foot in the air, were to a point. The heat must have been, you know, so intense, because it did burn it that quick. They claimed that in a 10-mile radius at Hiroshima, that everything was destroyed for a 10-mile radius. We heard that there was 3 Japanese armies were killed. And I don't know how many, hundreds of thousands of people. But yeah, it was flat. But the Japs had raked brick aside and had little sprouts coming out of the ground, 4 or 5 inches tall. They're bean sprouts or whatever they call them. But all the time they were testing these bombs, they claimed they wouldn't sustain life in that area for 2 or 3 years. And out here they had sprouts growing, and we were in there 90 days after the bomb dropped. So.
Well, Bud, I'd like to thank you for your time. We're going to have to wrap it up here in a second. Anything else you'd like to say real quick about your time overseas or in the military?
Well, I got a little story about New Year's Eve.
I don't know if we have time for that, though, unfortunately. Maybe we can get you to come back for another interview.
Well, I thank you very much.
Thanks again for sharing your time and experience with us. Again, my guest today was Mr. Warren Bud, almost did it again, Mr. Bud Cornock. I'm going to stick with Bud. That works out a lot better for me. And my name is Michael Vanderpool. I was your host today on the Veterans History Project.